Under the pale sky of a Sunday morning, June 1st, 1862, the Cumberland mountains of Kentucky seemed to slumber in dawn's chill. Early light filtered through ancient oaks, casting shimmering patches on a silver-glinting creek. At a remote farm nestled on a hillside, Jake Malone, a rugged farmer with calloused hands from years of toil, stirred on his creaky wooden bed. The fireplace crackled, blending with the aroma of cornbread wafting from the small kitchen, where Sarah, his wife, quietly prepared breakfast. It was the scent of peaceful days, evoking weekends by the creek. Jake teaching his 11-year-old daughter Emma to cast a fishing line, while 6-year-old Johnny chased dragonflies. But today, such simple moments had no place. The Civil War, with its brutal divide between Union and Confederacy, had turned this land into an unforgiving battlefield, soaked in blood and hatred. Jake stretched, rising, his bare feet meeting the icy wooden floor. He yawned, gazing out the window where faint light battled the misty fog. He imagined a leisurely day, maybe frying extra bacon, Johnny's favorite, and telling Emma tales of his grandfather, a Revolutionary War veteran from Lexington. But the dream shattered instantly. A deafening explosion like a cannon blast at the doorstep tore through the silence. Bullets screamed, piercing the thin wooden walls, leaving jagged holes and splintered debris. The crack of shattering wood mixed with Sarah's panicked scream as she yanked Emma and Johnny to the floor, shielding them with her body. "Get down!" her voice broke, trembling like a leaf in a storm. Jake, still in his worn nightshirt, lunged to the window, heart pounding as if to burst. Through the smudged glass, he saw them, a dozen armed men emerging from the forest's shadows like specters from hell. Mounted on horses, pistols glinting at their hips, their eyes were cold, hungry to devour the farm. Leading them was Mike Reaper Carson, a notorious Confederate guerrilla feared across Cumberland. With wild black hair and a sinister grin, Carson looked like a predator, his gaze sharp as a razor. His nickname, Reaper, stemmed not just from his brutality, but from whispers of nights spent alone in the woods, as if communing with something otherworldly. Today, he came not to parley. Blood was his aim, and Jake Malone his prey. Sarah, face ashen, screamed amid the howling bullets, "Run, Jake!" Her voice cracked with love and terror. Jake didn't think. He bolted out the back door, bare feet pounding cold earth, breath ragged like a hunted beast. Each step battled the mental scars war had carved. Neighbors slaughtered, homes burned, and tales of Carson who never spared his quarry. But Jake couldn't stop. He had to live for Sarah, Emma, Johnny. Carson, astride a massive black horse like a nightmare beast, spotted Jake. With a bellowing shout, he spurred forward, Colt pistol raised, steel flashing in the dawn. A shot rang out, its echo piercing. Jake felt a searing pain tear through his left shoulder, hot blood soaking his nightshirt. Yet he ran, adrenaline flooding like a divine elixir, dulling pain and fear. More shots followed, bullets thudding into nearby oaks with deadly thwacks. Each was a reminder that the Reaper was at his heels, with nowhere to hide. Jake aimed for a wooden fence 50 yards from the house, hoping to cross it and vanish into the dense forest. Behind, Carson's horse hooves thundered like a death knell, each beat closer to doom. Jake felt the horse's hot breath, heard Carson's mocking laugh, cold as winter wind. "No escape, Malone," his voice roared, echoing as if all Cumberland witnessed the hunt. Blood drenching his back, Jake clawed at the fence, trembling hands hauling his body over rough timbers. But Carson was too close. Another shot exploded, the bullet ripping through Jake's back, shattering his body. He collapsed, face in the dirt, blood pooling in his mouth, breaths faint as a candle in a gale. Emma, the 11-year-old with tangled blonde hair, defied danger, sprinting past Carson's men. Her small feet pounded dew-soaked grass, eyes blurred with tears. Reaching her father's body, she knelt, clutching Jake, his blood staining her white dress red. Sarah, following, collapsed beside her husband, trembling hands touching his face. Jake managed one gasping breath, eyes fading as if seeing a distant place none could follow. From the house, Carson and his men's ghastly laughter mingled with sounds of looting. They took Jake's horse, a few silver coins, and his pocket watch, a keepsake from a time when the nation knew peace. But amid the pain and loss, something strange stirred. An unnatural cold wind swept through, carrying a stench like long dead flesh. From the forest, a low growl rumbled, neither beast nor human. Carson, though cold-blooded, froze, his gaze darting to the woods with unease. He ordered a retreat, and the guerrillas vanished into the shadows, leaving the Malones in wordless grief. But that growl and the eerie chill lingered. It was a warning that this land belonged not only to the living, and Jake Malone's blood may have awakened something ancient, lurking in Cumberland's darkness. Beneath the gray sky of June 1st, 1862, Jake Malone ran as if his life hung on every step. Blood from the wound in his left shoulder soaked his worn nightshirt, each heartbeat a stabbing pain, but he couldn't stop. Ahead, about 50 yards from the house, a rough wooden fence loomed like a fragile hope. If he could cross it, Jake might slip into the dense oak forest of Cumberland, where winding trails from his hunting youth were as familiar as his own hands. The woods, with every tree and crevice he knew, could hide him from any pursuer. Even Mike Reaper Carson, the brutal guerrilla, chasing him like a specter from a nightmare. The thundering hooves behind him pounded like a death knell, each beat a reminder that doom was closing in. Carson, astride a massive black horse, charged like a storm, Colt pistol raised, his 10 henchmen fanned out behind, their eyes cold as starving wolves. Carson's mocking laugh sliced the air, sharp as a razor. His voice roared across the desolate field, as if all of Cumberland bore witness to the hunt. A lone farmer against the reaper. Jake, body faltering from blood loss, gritted his teeth, bare feet slamming wet, dew-soaked earth. Each step was a silent prayer for Sarah, Emma, and little Johnny, the family he couldn't abandon to Carson's mercy. The fence was mere steps away. Jake reached out, trembling fingers clawing at the rough wood, struggling to haul himself over. Blood streamed, staining the ground, dyeing wild grass red. He felt the hot breath of Carson's horse, heard the clink of saddle chains like funeral bells. Another shot rang out, its echo deafening. The bullet tore through Jake's back, shredding his body like a cleaver strike. Pain erupted, flooding his senses, and he collapsed face first into cold dirt. Blood filled his mouth, its iron tang mixing with damp earth. His breaths grew faint, each gasp a flickering candle in a gale. From the house, 11-year-old Emma, her blonde hair tangled, burst forth like a small whirlwind. Ignoring Carson's men, hulking figures with pistols and knives, she ran, tiny feet pounding wet grass, eyes blurred with tears. She didn't heed the horse's hooves or the guerrilla's ghastly laughter. Her mind held only her father, who told tales of Lexington battles. taught her to tie knots, and laughed when she spilled water buckets. Reaching Jake's bloodied body, she knelt, clutching him tightly. His blood soaked her white dress, but Emma didn't care. She pressed her cheek to his chest, whispering futile pleas, her voice breaking in the wind's howl. Sarah, following, collapsed beside her husband, trembling hands touching his face. That face, once bright when recounting his Revolutionary War grandfather, was now cold, eyes closed as if gazing at a distant realm none could see. Jake managed one ragged breath, a sound like falling dry leaves, before silence claimed him. Sarah held Emma, their tears and blood mingling as grief tore their hearts. From the house, Carson and his men's vile laughter mixed with looting sounds. They stole Jake's beloved horse, raised from a foal, a few silver coins from a clay jar, and his silver pocket watch, a keepsake from a time when the nation knew peace. But amid the agony and loss, something strange stirred. An unnatural cold wind cut through, sharp as a blade, carrying a stench like long decayed flesh. The air grew heavy, pressing on the chest, stifling even Emma's sobs. From deep within the oak forest, a low growl rumbled, unlike any creature born of this earth. It was primal, deep, as if Cumberland's soil groaned for the blood soaked into it. The sound was neither human nor holy beast, something in between, a warning from realms mortals shouldn't touch. Carson, his heart hard as stone, froze. He looked up, sharp eyes scanning the forest where shadows seemed to writhe, more alive than usual. The sinister grin on his lips vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease, as if he sensed something watching from the dark. His men, laughing while ransacking the house, fell silent, gripping pistols, eyes darting. "Let's go," Carson ordered, his voice low, lacking its usual swagger. The guerrillas mounted swiftly, hoofbeats fading, leaving the Malones in wordless grief as darkness enveloped the field. But the growl didn't fade. It echoed, now near, now far, as if something lurked in the woods, waiting. Sarah, clutching Emma, felt an inexplicable chill pierce her bones. She glanced at the forest where dawn's light couldn't reach, wondering if Jake's blood had roused something ancient, a curse the Cherokee whispered of centuries ago. This land, drenched in blood and hatred, no longer belonged to the living. As darkness fell, the Malones, kneeling by Jake's body, didn't know their story was merely the start of a darker mystery waiting in Cumberland's heart. In the peaceful days before the Civil War erupted, Mike Carson was an ordinary man, no different from other farmers in Kentucky's Cumberland mountains. Under crimson sunsets, he'd sit on his wooden porch, sipping homemade whiskey, regaling neighborhood kids with hunting tales. With tousled black hair and a warm smile, Carson was the guy folks at the local tavern bought a drink for, just to hear about chasing a black bear up a ridge or nailing a deer from 200 yards. He had a wife, Martha, with kind eyes, and 2 young kids who'd scamper around the yard when he returned from the woods. But that was the old Mike Carson, before war and hatred twisted him into something more terrifying than any beast he'd ever hunted. When Tennessee seceded from the Union in 1860, Cumberland became a bloody fault line between Union and Confederate supporters. Carson, now 40, faced a fateful choice. It wasn't slavery, rare in these hills, that drove him to the Confederate cause, but a promise from Tom Bradley, a sharp-eyed local lawyer. Bradley, who'd helped Carson dodge horse theft and murder charges in 1858, whispered that all his sins would be erased if he fought for the South. To Carson, it wasn't just a chance to clear his past. It was a call to unleash the darkness simmering in his soul. Carson didn't fight like a regular soldier, clad in gray and marching under a Confederate flag. He thrived in shadows, relishing the freedom of a guerrilla. Leading a ruthless band of men, he turned Cumberland into his hunting ground. He moved like a specter, striking from hidden trails where moonlight couldn't reach. His Colt pistol was ever ready, but his dagger was his true love. He savored killing up close, staring into victims' eyes as their light faded. "Nothing's more real than that moment," he'd boast to his men, a sinister grin glowing by campfire light. Rumors claimed he notched his dagger's handle for each kill, like a hunter marking trophies. When the handle ran out of space, darker tales spread. Carson rolling victims' heads down hills, laughing as they tumbled through rocks and thorns, a perverse game only a soulless man could enjoy. Locals dubbed him Reaper, Death, not just for his merciless cruelty, but for the eerie stories that trailed him like shadows. Whispers told of moonless nights when Carson stood alone in the woods, muttering to something unseen. Some hunters swore they saw him by a creek, eyes glinting like a beast's, as if bargaining with an ancient force. Elderly Cherokee in secluded valleys spoke of a curse from their ancestors. Blood spilled on this land would awaken vengeful spirits, beings not of the living world. Carson scoffed at such tales, calling them drunkards' yarns and old wives' nonsense. Yet even he couldn't deny the strange chill that sometimes crawled up his spine, as if something watched from the dark. The killing of Jake Malone on June 1st, 1862, was no random act. It stemmed from a burning personal vendetta sparked weeks earlier at a peace meeting in Monroe, Tennessee. Jake, a member of the local Union militia, had stood up to represent those seeking to end the region's bloody raids. To Carson, Jake's presence was an unforgivable insult. Peace to him signaled weakness, a betrayal of what he saw as a fight for survival. Jake, with his steadfast loyalty to the Union and that damn Lincolnite, as Carson growled, became the perfect target for his rage. In Carson's warped mind, killing Jake wasn't just warfare. It was a way to assert dominance, to remind Cumberland that the Reaper spared no one. Carson planned the attack with a seasoned hunter's precision. He knew Jake would be home that Sunday morning with his family, unguarded. He knew the creek near the farm was Jake's favorite, where he took Emma and Johnny fishing. But Carson cared nothing for those tender moments. To him, Jake wasn't a father, husband, or hard-working farmer. He was an enemy, and enemies died. Leading his men from the forest, Carson envisioned Jake's blood soaking the earth, a testament that no one defied him and lived. But even Carson, with his stone-cold heart, couldn't foresee what followed Jake's death. As he and his men looted the house, taking Jake's horse, a few silver coins, and his silver pocket watch, a keepsake from his Revolutionary War grandfather, an unease crept into his mind. The unnatural cold wind, the stench like rotting corpses, and the low growl from the forest weren't things he could dismiss as superstition. His eyes darted to the woods where shadows seemed to stir, more alive than usual. For the first time, Mike Reaper Carson felt he wasn't the only predator in Cumberland. When he ordered retreat, his voice was low, masking a fear he dared not admit. After Jake Malone's killing on June 1st, 1862, Kentucky's Cumberland mountains sank deeper into darkness. Not just from spilled blood, but from mysteries weaving through every tree and crevice. Mike Reaper Carson, the infamous guerrilla with a sinister grin and razor-sharp gaze, didn't pause after Jake's death. Like a predator never sated, he continued spreading terror across Fentress County, leaving bodies and fear haunting remote trails. Days after the Malone farm attack, Carson and his men killed 5 more men, each death marked by unrelenting brutality. Joe Harper, a gentle farmer who once shared whiskey with Carson, was shot through the heart on his porch. Bill Carter, a burly blacksmith, was dragged over a cliff, his body shattered on jagged rocks. Most chilling was Tommy Reed, a 16-year-old with bright eyes and dreams of teaching. The nephew of a judge who once ordered Carson's arrest for murder in 1858, Tommy was stabbed through the chest, his blood staining the creek where he fished. Carson claimed his victims were enemies of the South, but the stark truth was uglier. He killed anyone who crossed his path. Old friends, neighbors, even children yet to grow. Each body Carson left scarred Cumberland, but it wasn't just his savagery that chilled locals. Strange tales spread like smoldering embers in the night, told by survivors and bold hunters venturing deep into the woods after dusk. They spoke of low growls, unlike any creature born on this earth, deep, primal, as if the land itself moaned for the blood soaked into it. Some hunters, voices trembling by campfires, swore they saw a massive shadow, over 10 feet tall, lurking among ancient oaks. Its eyes, red as glowing coals, glinted in the dark, watching, waiting. Locals, especially elders who'd heard Cherokee ancestors' stories, whispered of an ancient curse. They said this land, long steeped in war and conflict, was haunted by a vengeful spirit, an unnamed entity awakened by acts of violence like Carson's. "Don't go into the woods after sunset," they warned, voices low like prayers, "for the Reaper doesn't walk alone." Carson, with a heart cold as stone, seemed unfazed by these whispers. He mocked them as drunkards' tales and superstitious nonsense, leading his men through moonlit trails where even moonlight barely pierced the leaves. To him, the locals' fear only fueled his Reaper legend, death of Cumberland. He relished the power of a trembling region, the panicked eyes of victims as he raised his dagger. Yet even Carson, who scoffed at ghosts and hate, couldn't fully shake the strange chill creeping up his spine, as if something watched from the shadows. One night, soon after Jake's death, Carson and his men camped near the creek where Jake's blood had soaked the earth. Under a starless sky, the campfire danced, illuminating the scarred faces of the guerrillas. They laughed, shared a whiskey bottle, and bragged of bloody deeds. But the air grew heavy when Eddie Slim Turner, a wiry man with shifty eyes, leapt up, face pale as if he'd seen a demon. Wordlessly, he bolted into the woods, leaving his rifle and gear, his panicked footsteps echoing. When the men found him at dawn, Eddie was curled by an oak, muttering endlessly. In a trembling voice, he claimed he saw Jake Malone by the creek, blood still seeping from his back wound. Jake said nothing, moved not, just stared at Carson with hollow eyes, as if summoning him to hell. Carson, by the fire, roared with laughter, his voice booming through the silent night. He called Eddie a lost lieutenant, joking he'd drunk too much whiskey or been spooked by local ghost stories. But behind the laugh, Carson's eyes flickered with unease. From that night, he never camped near the creek again, though no one dared ask why. The oddities didn't cease. Locals reported hearing heavy footsteps in the woods at night, but when they looked, only still darkness greeted them. Hunters spoke of prey vanishing mysteriously, as if yanked into shadows before a shot could be fired. A cattle herder swore he found footprints twice a man's size, pressed deep near the creek. Though Carson dismissed these tales, they sowed an invisible fear. People avoided the woods after dusk, locked doors, and prayed, not just against Carson, but against something larger, older, lurking in the dark. Cumberland, drenched in blood and hatred, seemed a crossroads between the living world and something else. Each of Carson's killings wasn't just a crime. It was a ritual, summoning the vengeful spirits the Cherokee had warned of. As Carson continued his bloody path, he didn't realize each stab, each bullet drew him closer to something even the Reaper couldn't face. Under the gray skies of Kentucky's Cumberland Mountains, the Civil War wasn't the glorified battles chronicled in history books, where thousands in blue and gray clashed on vast fields. Here, war wore a different face, brutal, personal, and merciless. In the early 1860s, border states like Kentucky became bloody fault lines, where law dissolved and loyalty was a death sentence. Civilians, from diligent farmers to families in remote log cabins, were trapped in the crossfire, prey for human hunters like Mike Reaper Carson. Suspected of supporting the opposing side, Union or Confederacy, death could strike on your doorstep amid screams and acrid gun smoke. Estimates suggest that beyond the 750,000 soldiers killed nationwide, about 50,000 civilians perished, a staggering toll when America's population was just 31 million. Each death was a scar, and Cumberland bore countless such wounds. Carson and his ilk, derided as bushwhackers or featherbed soldiers, earned scorn from both sides. The Union saw them as bandits, the Confederacy as undisciplined chaos sowers. But contempt didn't deter Carson. For him, war wasn't about noble ideals or waving flags. It was a chance to shed all restraint, to nurture the darkness long simmering in his soul. He didn't fight for the South or slavery, rare in these hills, but for hatred and the perverse thrill of killing. Carson once said in a voice low like a demon's whisper that in these mountains the law was simple: kill your neighbor or he kills you. Yet for him, killing wasn't just survival. It was a ritual, a way to assert absolute power over those who dared defy him. Carson targeted the weakest, as if their fragility beckoned him. The sick, the elderly, even children. None escaped his dagger or Colt pistol. Once, in an unexplained rage, he stormed the home of Sam Wheeler, an old friend who'd hunted deer with him in peaceful days. Sam, bedridden with fever, barely lifted his head as Carson's shadow loomed across the wooden floor. Having once joked that Lincoln wasn't as bad as Southern papers claimed, Sam had unwittingly signed his death warrant. Without a word, Carson raised his gun, and a single shot ended the life of the man who'd shared whiskey with him. Sam's body lay there, blood soaking the old blanket, as Carson ransacked the house, taking a few coins and a hunting knife, like trophies from a hunt. Not far off, at Fort Donelson, Union and Confederate forces clashed in bloody battles, where gun smoke choked the air and cannon fire shook the earth. Those fights, with thousands fallen, were etched as historical milestones. But in Cumberland, war was personal, fueled by smoldering grudges erupting in the dark. Each of Carson's killings scarred the community, tearing apart families once gathered in joy, turning neighbors into enemies. Wooden homes, once alive with children's laughter, stood silent, doors bolted at dusk. Locals whispered that the blood of victims like Jake Malone, Sam Wheeler, and young Tommy Reed didn't just seep into the earth, it awakened something ancient, a curse the Cherokee had warned of centuries ago. They said this land, steeped in hatred and violence, no longer belonged to the living. And Carson, with every stab and shot, was unwittingly summoning vengeful spirits, waiting in the shadows to exact justice in their own way. In 1865, as the smoke of the American Civil War began to clear, Mike Carson, a man once the terror of Kentucky's lands, stood shackled before the gallows. His war crimes, acts of unspeakable brutality, were etched deep into the minds of survivors. In Nashville, on a crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted across the town square, Carson faced his final judgment. The noose tightened around his neck, his eyes vacant, and before a silent crowd, his last breath left his body. People believed justice had been served, that the darkness Carson sowed would vanish like morning mist. But the Cumberland region, steeped in blood and tears, had its own way of clinging to tales of sorrow. In the years that followed, as the war faded into distant memory, locals began whispering of strange occurrences. On moonless nights, when darkness swallowed all light, the Cumberland forests seemed to awaken with sounds not of this world. Hunters, accustomed to the whistle of wind through leaves and the rustle of wild animals, spoke of a low, guttural growl, as if rising from the earth itself. A foul, acrid stench would suddenly flood the air, sending shivers down their spines. And in the shadows, sometimes they glimpsed a pair of glowing red eyes, peering from behind ancient trees, watching, waiting. Some swore it was Mike Carson, or at least something bearing his form, cursed to wander the very land he once stained with blood. No one could say for certain what it was. Some claimed it was Carson's soul, bound by his atrocities, forever denied rest. Others, hardened by the war's losses, dismissed it as a trick of the mind, a way to grapple with pain that never faded. But whatever it was, the Cumberland had changed. The small creek where Jake Malone, one of Carson's victims, once sat dreaming of peaceful days, now lay abandoned. Its waters still flowed, clear and sparkling under sunlight, but after dusk, no one dared approach. They said the growl of what they called the Reaper, still echoed somewhere, waiting for the reckless. The Malone family, who once called the Cumberland home, could no longer bear the memories of Jake. They packed their belongings, leaving behind a land heavy with remembrance, carrying their grief like a scar that would never heal. Their old log cabin, nestled in the valley, now stood as a faint shadow, consumed by vines and time. Those who remained, farmers and hunters, learned to live with the fear. They passed down the story of Carson, of the Reaper, as a warning to their children. "Don't go into the woods at night," they said, voices hushed as if afraid to stir something awake. "And if you hear the growl, run. Run as fast as you can." If you ever drive the winding roads of Kentucky and stop at a roadside diner, you might hear locals speak of the Reaper. They'll tell the tale with distant eyes, as if they felt the icy chill of those red eyes in the dark. Don't scoff or show doubt. In the Cumberland, stories aren't just tales. They're part of the land, the air, the winds that sweep through the valleys. On some nights, when the moon hides and fog blankets the earth, people still hear that growl, faint but enough to quicken the pulse. Is it Carson's spirit or merely an echo of the past? No one knows for sure, but as you leave, as your headlights pierce the road ahead, you might glance in the rearview mirror, just to be certain nothing's following. The Reaper's story lives on, passed from generation to generation, a reminder that some wounds never heal and some shadows never fade. Perhaps somewhere in the Cumberland forests, something still waits, silent and patient, in the darkness. Drop a comment about which spooky story you'd like me to tell next. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.